land. Beulah land, sweet Beulah land. So many times I've questioned certain circumstances of things I did not understand. And many times in trials, weakness blurs my vision, and my frustration gets so out of hand. It's then I am reminded I've never been forsaken. I've never had to stand the test alone. As I look at all the victories,
Our lesson this morning has to do with David and his fugitive years, taken from different texts of 1 Samuel, and Psalms. Golden text says, David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. That'll come out to play here a little bit later in the lesson, but what do you think that meant when it said David behaved himself wisely in all his ways? Any idea? Anybody? What? Well, everybody messes up once in a while, right? Okay. That's a good point. And I'll come out and play a little bit later. Yeah. Okay. All right. That plays too. And that's a lesson that we could all use and work on today and in our own lives. But in the essence of David, especially in this text this morning, or as we get into it, you'll find that it pertains to the way he conducted himself when he was being pursued by Saul. And that's what this lesson's about, is David's fugitive years. It's the years he was running from Saul, who was the king of Israel at the time and was after David's life. But it said David behaved himself wisely, and like I said, that'll come out here in just a few minutes. But the first verse we have, it says, then Jonathan, give me the first one, Brother Lee. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. What's that mean, made a covenant? Made an agreement? Promise? It goes beyond that. Agreement, a pact, a covenant, it's to the point where it's like a legal binding contract. It's the same thing, carries the same significance as the covenant that God cut with Abraham and the covenant that he made with the church. But notice what it says, then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. What's that tell you? Loved him as his own soul. Like brothers? Okay. Anybody else? Do you think that there's any of that in the world today? Very little. In fact, it could almost be said the exact opposite. When you get into the word covenant, it has a very strong uh, meaning, and it goes over into, and he loved him as his own soul, to the point that in the world today, if you find somebody that are good friends, that's one thing. But to find somebody that had the wherewithal to cut a covenant with somebody else goes up and beyond just a friendly kind of friendship. Friendship. Here it says, because he loved him as his own soul. Do you have a comment, brother? Right, very strong promise. Okay. Uh, and throughout their lives, Jonathan's was cut short in a battle along with his father. But throughout the life of David and Jonathan, this covenant was honored to the point that even after David ascended the throne, that he inquired among his fellow servants one day, is there any left of the household of Saul that I can show them kindness for what? Jonathan's sake. Because David, even after Jonathan was gone, even after Jonathan had departed this life, David still carried a deep place in his heart for Jonathan to the point that he wanted to honor that covenant even after the death of his friend. That's how deep it went. And so he honored David Jonathan had a, I forget what relationship it was, but there was one called Mephibosheth, who David honored by bringing him into his own home and honoring simply because of his love and his friendship for Jonathan. Can you imagine what that is like I said, in the world today, when it seems like it takes it doesn't take much to be at somebody else's throat or somebody to be at your throat. It's mind-boggling to think that in this time, David and Jonathan had that kind of friendship that it would last throughout their lifetime. And it carried through all the time that David was running from Saul. Any questions or comments? All right, give me the next one, Brother Lee. Now, you got to keep in mind that during this time, this is after the battle with Goliath, after the people had sung the praises of David, saying that Saul had killed his thousands, but David killed what? His 10,000s. Because he went against this man called Goliath, who was the champion of the army of the Philistines, and he won the battle. And so David, excuse me, Saul becomes very jealous of David, and he begins to pursue him, to kill him. Why do you think, in the first place, why do you think Saul would be so adamant, so determined to try to take the life of David? He was what? Jealous. Isn't that something that jealousy could, but yet it happens all the time, that people could let jealousy enter into their life or enter into their heart to the point where they're willing to commit murder for it. And that's what Saul was doing. He was so jealous of David that that he wanted to murder David. Now, with that thought in mind, is that the only reason that Saul wanted to slay David? Okay, Saul was looking at this thing from two different perspectives. One, it was an affront to him that they were singing the praises of they being the people, were singing the praises of David while he himself was sitting on the throne as the king. He was jealous of that fact. But he was also jealous of the fact that David could raise up because he was becoming so popular with the people that he could rise up and take the throne away from Saul. And not only in doing that, but Saul's lineage, Saul's heritage was at stake also, because who was next in line for the throne? Jonathan was, as the prince regent. He was the next in line for the throne. And so Saul was looking out for his heritage. He's looking out for prosperity because he wanted his son to succeed him on the throne. But what in all of that wasn't in play? With that thought in mind, with that thinking, what was Saul leaving out? God was left out of the picture at all, the whole picture in Saul's mind. Because at this point, I think you could safely say that I doubt if Saul was really head on pleasing the Lord in anything he did, because of the way he conducted his life and the things that happened, things that transpired. And so David has already been anointed king. All he's waiting for is God's time to ascend to the throne. What's that got to do with us today? What can we glean out of this today? What can we get from this today? What? Wait on the Lord. What else? Do you think we need to guard against jealousy in any way, shape, or form? Do we have a battle with that, you think? A prospect of a battle? And how big could that battle be? It could overwhelm us sometimes if we let it. Uh-huh. Jealousy. All right. And Saul spake unto Jonathan his son, uh-huh, that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee. And what I see, that will I tell thee. What do you see happening here? Okay, Jonathan's warning David. But also, let's go back up to verse 1. Saul spake unto Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. Jonathan told David, saying, what's that got to do with anything? Exactly. It goes back to that covenant that they had just had. What's that got to do with us? Right. Isn't that something? This covenant that David and Jonathan had, this feeling that they had for each other, went beyond a family, anything the family had. But what else does it show you? Mary mentioned relationships. What else does it show you? What else does it show you? Something more personal. What can be more personal than your relationship with your friends or your family? Exactly. The covenant we have with God ourselves. Right. And that's what this is a type of. David and Jonathan had such a covenant that they were inseparable, if you will. And that's the way our covenant should be with God. To the point that no matter what happens, no matter what the friends say, no matter what the family says, no matter what this happens or that happens, no matter what the crisis, we still should maintain our fellowship and our communion and our covenant with God Almighty. To the point that nothing is going to sever it. And that's what Jonathan was doing. He was honoring his covenant with David. He was even going against his father's will. His father said to Jonathan and his servants that they should kill David. How do you think it made Jonathan feel? No doubt hurt his feelings. And he's probably wondering why in the world was his father wanting or willing to go this far, that far, that he would kill his best friend. But still again, there's Jonathan looking around, looking back, and saying, regardless of what my father wants, it's not right, and I'm not going to do it. And that's the way we should look at it. Regardless of what anything else, if the Father doesn't will it, we shouldn't do it. Right? That they should kill, but Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul, my father seeketh to kill thee. He didn't pull no punches with him. Right? What do you get out of that? Jonathan told David that his father seeketh to kill thee. Has God hid anything in his word from us as far as the devourer of our soul? No, he said he's like a roaring lion, what? Seeking whom he may devour. So Jonathan is protecting David. Now, therefore, I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place. In other words, go hide yourself in this particular place. And he said, I'll be with my father in the field, and where thou art, in the same field where you are, and I will commune with my father and of thee, and see what I see, that will I tell thee. David said, or Jonathan said, I'll not hold anything back. Well, whatever he says, I'll tell it to you. Open and shut case. Any questions or comments? I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see, that will I tell thee. All right, give me the next one. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, Thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? What's going on here? That's exactly what he's doing. And that's exactly what he's done, right? Jonathan has chosen David over Saul. Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, his own son. You know, it happens all the time, right? You get mad at your kids, no big deal. But this goes beyond that. He said unto him, Thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? Yeah. Right. And is that acceptable or not? Would that be just cause to be angry with somebody? That's what I'm saying. Most of all. Yeah, you would think, we would expect support from them, right? But, and this is a big but, what if they're in the wrong? Saul was in the wrong, wouldn't you agree? But still, he was upset. I'll get to you in a minute, brother. Still, he was upset because Jonathan was as they would say today, disrespecting him to the point where he wasn't giving Saul the support that Saul thought he needed and wanted and deserved. But what about that word deserved? Did Saul deserve the respect and the support of Jonathan in this case? No, definitely not. Definitely not. Because what Saul was planning was totally, you got a comment? Yeah. Well, what else do you see here that Saul is doing around Jonathan? Like what? Okay, good point. But that's what he's doing. He's insulting Jonathan through his mother. He's insulting his mother, thereby bringing reproach upon Jonathan because he says, Jonathan, basically, Jonathan, you're so low and despicable right now. You're an embarrassment to your mother, and so forth. And one commentator said that was during this particular time, as well as today, I think, it was there was no other, for lack of a better term, worse insult than to insult somebody's mother through them. Does that make you mad when people insult your family, especially your mother? Because of that mother-child relationship, that bonding there, and you know, if people insult your mother, it gets you mad pretty quick, right? I'm sure it does, and rightly so. But that's what Saul was doing. He was insulting Jonathan through his mother. Thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness. For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, excuse me, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him to me, for he shall surely die. What's that tell you? What's that tell you about Saul? Exactly. What was that rightful place? The next in line for the throne. But the word that I was looking for there in Sister Lee, that he was determined. He was determined to wipe David out. So eat up with this jealous thing, so eat up with this whole scenario that he was determined to do whatever it took to wipe David out. What's that got to do with the world today? How does that play in the world today? Anyway, shape or form? Right? Okay. For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established. You won't come to the throne. Do you get the hint here that Saul has recognized or on the verge of accepting the fact that David has already been anointed king? David is the next in line for the throne. He's telling Jonathan that if you don't, as long as he lives, you'll not rise to the throne with all the prestige and everything else that gives it. Thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. You think, given the opportunity, that Saul would have killed David himself as opposed to having one of his servants do it? Exactly, because you see time and time again that during these years, given the opportunity, Saul would try to take David's life a couple of different times. He threw a javelin at him, a javelin being spear, a warrior spear, trying to take the life of David. He was that determined. See how this thing can, what's that tell you about humanity as well as what drives a man, a person? I tell you, from a dire desire to an obsession, right? But if we don't what? Keep things in check and keep things in a proper perspective, it'll overtake us. Ever known somebody to do that? Maybe on one time they were a solid, devout Christian, and then something happens, and all of a sudden they've gone the exact other way. It happens. It happens. The thing of it is, in Saul, no room for repentance. There was no room for, to back up and say, like David in his later years, sure, he made mistakes. He admitted them. He repented of them and went on. You don't see that in a lot of lives. That's the difference. That's the difference. Questions or comments? All right, then the next one. Now, a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. Now, between verse 30 of chapter 20 and where we're at now, David has been on the run. He goes into a certain city called Nob. There he confronts the priest, the high priest, and this is during the time where he, like I said, he's running from Saul and he has no food or nothing with him, no weapons or nothing of this sort. So he goes to the priest, seeking refuge, if you will. And what does he find there? Anybody know this story? Remember this story? What does he find? Showbread on the altar or on the table. Now, what's that showbread for? There's 12 loaves. Who was to eat of it? The priests, right. It was the sacred loaves that were set aside, that were part of the ritual that they went through the temple rituals they go through. But it was set aside for the priests. They would eat it on a certain day, and then as they consumed that, 12 other loaves, fresh loaves, would be brought in and put in its place. It was always to be there. Yeah. Exactly. But the bread was the thing I want to get to, is the fact that it was meant just for the priest to eat. Now, David comes to the priest there. I think his name was Ahimelech, and asks him for something to eat. And the priest tells him there's nothing here except for the showbread. So David goes ahead and takes it. Now, where does that come up again later on? Over in the New Testament, Jesus touches on it during his teachings. He asks the people, have you not read what David did? How that he went into the priest and ate the shewbread, which was not lawful for him except for the priest to have. But anyway, this is during that time. But during that time that David was there talking to the high priest, getting these provisions from this priest, and he also asked, is there any weapons there? And the priest tells you there's nothing here except the sword of Goliath, which you used to kill Goliath. Behold, it's wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. And David says, there's nothing other like it. Give it to me. So he takes the sword of Goliath also. But this man named Doeg is there. He's an Edomite. And who's an Edom? Who are Edomites? You remember anything about them? At one time, they were the sworn enemies of Israel. Here, this guy is a servant of Saul, king of one of his herdsmen, over his herdmen. And he's there the same time, and he sees David there talking to the priest, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. So keep that in mind. He's an Edomite. He's of the servants of Saul, and he sees what transpires with David. Now we're jumping down to chapter 22, verse 9. It says, then answered Doeg, the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. What do you see happening here? Saul is inquiring about where David's at. Saul wants to know where he's at because he wants to kill him. This guy is there at the same time in the city of Nob, and he sees David, so forth, etc. And Saul is inquiring, and all of a sudden, this cat steps up and he says, I saw David, in the son of Jesse. He didn't call him Destiny, he calls him the son of Jesse, coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. What do you see there? What do you see there? Yeah, it's exactly what he's doing. He's telling Saul what he saw. And why do you think he'd do that? Why do you think he'd do that? Yeah, why would he do that? Exactly, for reward, personal gain, thinking that, hey, I got a chance to step up here and maybe get me some, get some in favor of the king. Yeah, you got okay, get in favor with the king. He said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to them, because this thing was so obsessive with Saul that no doubt anybody that got around him and knew anything about him knew about this particular thing, that he was after David to slay him. But this guy, this Doeg, the Edomite, set over the servants of Saul, and said that he saw the son of Jesse, son of Jesse, talking to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. Now, Ahimelech was the high priest. Well, it'll come to play later on. The king said, Thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech, thou and all thy servants' house. Now, what transpired in between there was Saul comes down there. He confronts this Ahimelech as to what has happened. And if you look at verse 9, the Edomite says he just saw Jesse there, the son of Jesse there. But we don't know what all he expounded upon when he told Saul that he saw him there. But in doing so, Saul comes down to Nob, confronts Ahimelech, and what's Ahimelech do? Anybody familiar with the story? He says, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't know David was running from you. I didn't know you were looking for him. I didn't know that, because David gave him a story when he came there. He said he was on the king's business, urgent king's business, that he couldn't even take time to gather up some food or to gather any weapons or anything else, or to even be with a king's guard, because David was of the if you want to put it this way, of the royal household, an ambassador of the royal household. So he naturally would have traveled with a guard, with an armed guard. He was by himself. So Ahimelech was just going on what David was telling him, which was a lie, because he wasn't on the king's business. He was running from the king. What's that tell you about our personal lives? Huh? He needed the food. He was desperate. What else did it tell you, though? Okay, willing to lie to get it, about human nature. What else? That if we don't control ourselves, we don't watch ourselves, circumstance will override what? Sense, huh? Exactly. Circumstances will override good sense, and before you know it, we're telling little white lies to cover up anything and to better our situation. Exactly. Even in all this, David still would go ahead. Uh-huh. 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 But it's so easy sometimes to get wrapped up in a situation and wrapped up in a crisis, if you will, uh, that we let down the standards and we forget who we are and what it's all about. Sometimes, right, right. I was gonna say you did your part. But what about this Doeg? What else do you see there in this character? What else do you see there? Anybody? Think of what he's done. Think of what he's doing. What do you see? He's a spy. What else? What else? He's a very despicable person. He's an evil person. He's out for himself. He's a self-serving individual to the point that he is willing to step up and say, knowing full well that the king is after David, but he is always he's ready to step up, and he's despicable. He's ready to step up and quick to rush to evil. He's quick to go to Saul and say, "Hey, I saw him. I know where he's at. I saw what he did. I can lead you to it." There's always somebody that's quick to do evil. There's always somebody quick to do evil, no matter who they are, where they are, or anything about it. Where do you see that in the New Testament? One particular instance stands out. Huh? Judas, exactly. It's the same thing. In fact, one commentator went on to say that this Doeg was a type of a type of Antichrist, to the point where he was coming against, and David being the type of Christ, so forth, etc. But this guy is so typical of throughout history of man being always somebody there to step up and to do this evil thing. Judas was there. He was ready to step up for what? 30 pieces of silver. Betray the Lord, whom he loved. You think Christ had the same love for Judas as he had for Peter? Exactly, he had to. But this character was of such that he fell right in hand, right in lot with Saul, to the point that he was very much like him. And if you look in the comments, it says, Doeg, another servant of Saul's, was worshiping at Nob while David was there. He was Saul's chief herdsman, and Doeg turned out to be a spy and a traitor to David's cause. Doeg, another servant of Saul's, was worshiping there. What do you see there? If he was there, and I think the scripture said at one point, the servant of Doeg was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg an Edomite. He was detained before the Lord. Whether or not what he was there for is basically, I start to say immaterial, but whatever he was there for. But under the guise of worship, what's that tell you? What do you get anything from that? Is it possible that, some of the people we sit with in church aren't true worshipers? Some of those that claim to be aren't really what they say they are. And the king said, Thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech, thou and all thy father's house. That's a sad note that comes into play and is fulfilled here in just the next verse. All right, give me the next one, Brother Lee. And one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, answered Abiathar, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priests. And David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day when Doeg was the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul. Now, what had happened in the transpired between then and now? Saul comes up and the last verse we just read said he's going to tell Elimelech that he should surely die. But during that time, Saul turns to his servants when he's there, and he tells them to fall upon the high priest and to slay him. None of the servants of Saul did it. This is where Doeg enters in, the despicableness of him. None of the servants do it because they did not want to put their hand against the Lord's anointing, against the Lord's servant, which is the same thing David does later on against Saul. He restrains himself. But this Doeg, what he does, he in turn, and he himself goes, and he kills Abiathar, the high priest. And he ends up slaying 85 priests that day. All of them, all of his family, his sons and his daughters, the oxen and everything in that town of Nob, he kills. He slays them. You see how low this guy has come? To the point that the King Saul turns to him and tells him to do it, and he does it on his own. You think there's any kind of remorse entered his mind or his heart when he did that? We don't know, but it's doubtful that he did because he did it without even thinking about it. 85 priests he ended up slaying that day, as well as their family. And when you get into the high priests and things of that nature, it all goes back to Eli, the high priest, because some of these was his descendants. And God told Eli when he slew his sons Hophni and Phinehas that he would never have, that his family would never be would never have a lineage of priesthood throughout his life. And this is the fulfillment of that particular place or prophecy, because some of these were of the descendants of Eli. And one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priests, and David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day. In other words, David is saying he recognized this Doeg when he was there, and something must have pricked him in his heart. Where he said, I knew it that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all these persons of thy father's house. Abide thou with me, fear not, for he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life. But with me thou shalt be in safeguard. What do you see happening here? What do you see? I have occasioned the death of these persons in thy father's house. Exactly. He's feeling the responsibility of it. He realizes that because by virtue of him being there and being seen there, that he opened this family up to this despicable act. He said, I have occasioned the death of all these persons of thy father's house. Abide thou with me and fear not, for he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life also, seeketh thy life, but with me thou shalt be in safeguard. What do you see happening here? How can we apply that to our life? Anyway, shape, form, anything? Anything? Exactly. That's exactly what it is. There's a parallel here between what David is telling this Ahimelech, or this Abiathar, and our life in Christ. As long as we abide in Christ, we have a safeguard in Christ. But outside that, as long as this Abiathar, as long as Abiathar was with David, he was safe. He would be safeguarded. As long as we're in Christ, we're safeguarded. But outside of that, we're not. He says, "Abide with me. Abide thou with me. Fear not." Yeah. Right. All right. Any questions or comments? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Uh-huh. Right. Right. Any other comments? All right, moving on. Now we're getting into the Psalm. Lo, this is the man that made not God his strength, but trusted in the abundance of his riches, and strengthened himself in his wickedness. But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it, and I wait on thy name, for it is good before thy saints. What has that got to do with what we're talking about here in Samuel with David? Anybody got an idea? First off, just what does it mean to you on the surface? Lo, this is the man that made not God his strength, but trusted in the advances of his riches. Again, one commentator that I read said this points back to this Doeg, that he was a man that he trusted not in God, but he trusted in his own strength. He trusted in the abundance of his riches. No doubt that part of the reward that Saul had given him had advanced him in economically as well as in other ways. But he strengthened himself in his wickedness. But I am like a green tree, a green olive tree in the house of God. What do you see here? Okay. Yeah. This commentator that I read took the first portion, verse 7 there, and said it refers to this Doeg. But the latter portion, verse 8 says, "But I am a green tree in the green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. I will praise thee forever." So that relates to Christ. Christ is the green olive tree. He trusted in the Lord. He in the God forever and ever. He was, I will praise thee. What are we? Could that be said, the same thing be said of us? That we are like a green olive tree in the house of the Lord, that we are to praise God forever and ever, and that we will have trust in the mercy of God forever and ever, that we will praise him forever, because thou hast done it. And I will wait on thy name, for it is good for thy servants. Right. But it still can be said of us that we too are alive. Why? Because of Christ. Questions or comments? Right. Right. Uh-huh. Questions, comments? All right, give me the next one, Brother Lee. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. What's that show you? Takes 3,000 men to seek David. Very adamant in his pursuit, very determined to see this thing through. 3,000 men. He's got nothing else to do right now but to seek David. No matter where he goes, what he does, and he's pursuing for a while, for a length of time. But he has nothing else more important to do. A determined individual, a determined foe. Same thing. Again, I say, as I think it was Peter said, he's like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Questions, comments? All right, give me the next one. You got it up there. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it has seemed good to thee. Now, what has transpired here is that in this particular instance, I think this is where they're in the cave. David's men is in the back of the cave, and Saul is up in the front of the cave, and Saul falls asleep, and his men all fall asleep, not knowing, unaware that David is there. But notice what it said, and the men answered him, Behold, the day of which the Lord hath said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. What do you get out of that? What do you get out of that? All right, while you chew on that, and it came to pass afterward that then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privately. What do you get out of that? Go ahead. He refused to. Why? Because David did not want to, if I could use the term, stoop to the low grade of depravity that Saul had come to in the pursuit of David's own life. Here's Saul laying before David, totally at his mercy. And what does David do? He cuts off the skirt of his garment, which later on becomes a great insult to Saul. But he didn't take his life. Although the men told him, says, look, God told you he's going to give you your enemies into your hand. Now's your opportunity. Arise and kill him. But David doesn't do it. Why do you think not? Honor in the Lord. What else? Okay. Still loved him, still revered him because of the fact that he was the anointed of the Lord and he was still the king. So David still had some awe and respect, revered him in that sense. So he doesn't kill him, he just cuts off his robe. And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him because he had cut off Saul's skirt. Yeah. Exactly. Good point. But what about that? Simply an simple act of just cutting off the hem of his garment, if you will, or the skirt of his garment, it smote David's heart. It touched his heart. It embarrassed him. What? That's the point that comes into play later on. When Saul gets up and leaves, and David cries out to him, and he shows him what he had actually done. There, Saul, the king, had his skirt cut off. His guards all around him, and David still escaped. Where do you see that happening in the New Testament? Okay, not once, but a couple of times I think he escaped out through the midst of it. Walked right through his enemies. Here, David was in the cave, the very guy Saul was looking for, but he was in the back of the cave. You got something to say, young lady? Huh? And David had the opportunity, the perfect opportunity, but he didn't do it because he knew it wasn't God's will. And he said unto his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master. Do you think it would be well for the people of God, the saints, to live by those few words? The Lord forbid that I should. You ever stop and think about that? Yeah. Right. Right. Okay. And this is the point, or this shows you the standard to which David held a high regard, that David held Saul and Saul's position. The Lord forbid that I should do this unto my master. The Lord's anointed to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is anointed of the Lord. Now, when you realize that, take that in, this is coming from David. How does the character of David differ from that of Doeg? Doeg, the guy that did that slew the high priest and the 85 prophets or 85 other priests. How do they differ? Do you see the difference there? Exactly. You see that basically what you see is the personification of evil and good. David doesn't even want to do it because he's the Lord's anointed. He's the king, and for that reason, if for no other reason at all, because he is the anointed of the king, anointed of the Lord, he said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to stretch forth my hand against this, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. Now, Doeg, in the case of the high priest, it seemed like it even entered his mind. Saul said, fall on him and kill him, and that's exactly what he did. He killed 85 of them and their families with no thought, no remorse, no thought as to what the ramifications of it are. Didn't make any difference to him that they were priests. Didn't make any difference to him that they were innocent. He did it anyway. Evil personified. Questions, comments? All right, let's go ahead and do the last one here. And David said unto Baasha, destroy him not, for who could stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said furthermore, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him on his day, shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed. But I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is in his bolster and the cruse of water, and let us go. Here again, Saul is before David, sleeping. David has another perfect opportunity to slay him. But here he says to this servant, he said, destroy him not,